folks, prepare your intuition like your life depends on it, because it does. Living in bodies that the world insists on seeing as broken, instead of honoring and respecting and beginning from a place of wholeness, is hard. So I find it completely rational to want to leave the body and live outside of ourselves and maybe safer that way. But I talk about one of the biggest ruptures to trauma in general. No matter who you are, your identities, it could be this rupture to intuition. I help folks remember how to trust themselves and their own intuition. And from that place, we can start to heal ourselves from an inner knowing versus externalizing our trust and waiting for someone else to tell us how to heal. Folks that are in touch with their intuition in their bodies are forces of nature.
Welcome to Deeply Well, a soft place to land on your journey, a podcast for those that are curious, creative, and ready to expand in higher consciousness and self-care. I'm Devi Brown. This is where we heal. This is where we become. Today's episode, we will be going on a journey of deeper embodiment. This episode is in deep service to getting even more beautifully connected to that sacred container of your spirit, your body. Today's special guest is Dr. Shena. Dr. Shena is a sacred being. She intends to live freely, authentically, to embody her sovereignty, to be cherished and respected by her ancestors, and to honor the ritual of calling community beloveds back into their bodies as a freedom practice. She is a licensed embodiment-focused psychologist, healer, trauma-informed consultant, yoga teacher, psychedelic-assisted therapist, and Ifa princess of Oshun and Obatala. She owns a private practice, embodied truth healing and psychological services rooted in Los Angeles, California, where she offers mind, body, heart, spirit care and healing from sexual, racial, intergenerational, and ancestral traumas. Her approach to healing divests from the westernized blueprint. As it traverses the body, nature-based approaches and indigenous wisdoms, African spiritual traditions as the medicine. She is adamant about nourishing a world that brings ancient healing traditions forward into our modern world with integrity, reverence, and respect. People trust her because in space with her, they remember how to trust themselves. Her work has been featured as a cover story in Resilient Magazine, Publishers Weekly, and she's been trusted to care and consult for The Body, A Home for Love, Black Girl in Ohm, Loveland Foundation, and Me Too movement communities, amongst many. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shena.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
There were just so many things that I was deeply resonating with, even just in rereading your bio for the show. Some of the words that stand out to me that are such driving forces in my life are integrity and reverence. Having reverence for your life's experiences to me, has been the greatest gift in moving myself forward into acceptance, into sovereignty, into being with all of it all the time.
Yes. Yeah, there's so much synergy between us. And so I appreciate that you get it. These are the ways that we can continue to rebirth ourselves and heal ourselves and our ancestors.
Oh my gosh. There is so much to dive into with you on this show.
Let's go.
And I want to invite everyone listening, wherever you happen to be listening, get comfy. Some things might come up in this episode that resonate deeply, that could also maybe give some charge. So just listen with consideration of how you tap into your own energy and your own body. Consider having a journal nearby and consider revisiting certain moments that you want to take a little more time with down the line. So to really get started, Dr. Shena, so you have a new book, and thank you so much for my copy. It's called Body Rites. And Body Rites is a written companion and workbook for readers, especially Black women, seeking to reclaim their bodies as home and healing from sexual trauma.
Yes.
Oh, wow. So there is trauma. There is so much trauma in this world, and so many different ways that we experience it when we choose to embody in this lifetime. And so we're working with a lot of facets of trauma, be that what I believe to be past life trauma, some of the things that come back in with us that we may be exploring through various lifetimes with various people. We have the larger containers of systemic trauma and societal trauma and current belief system trauma that kind of permeates us in so many different ways. And then we have very specific trauma, the things that we experience in this life that are very often the centerpieces of our spiritual curriculum and what we'll be thinking about for long periods of time. And especially when it comes to sexual trauma. I mean, that is something, and I'm curious, this is me actually kind of stating something in the way I believe it, but I'm so deeply curious in the way that you hold it and believe it. When it comes to physical abuses in this lifetime, physical traumas, those are the things that seem to really take us completely away from our human experience and make it really hard to kind of understand yourself as a soul or a spirit or make a lot of forward movement in this life because of that disconnect. Yes. And so I would just like to turn it over to you into this beautiful work, Body Rites, and the way that you as an expert have observed this in women's bodies and what this book is meant to birth.
Yes, thank you for that beautiful opening. I, as a Black woman who is fluid and also a survivor myself, I know this experience. I know what it's like to live in a body that is the crime scene, as I often say, right? So when you have a car accident at the corner of A and Z Street, you can avoid that intersection, right? But when you've experienced this violation to your body, you have to live in it. And so many of us find ways to live beside it, to live above it, to live beyond it, underneath it. And so Body Rites is a gift to Black survivors of sexual trauma who want to find home in their bodies. And, you said it so beautifully about how trauma can interrupt our relationship with our spirits. And I believe holistically, which is how the book is grounded, the healing journeys throughout the book are coming from a decolonized and holistic approach. So what that means is I'm thinking about how trauma, lived experiences in general affect us mind, body, heart, and spirit. The mind piece is what we tend to, in a Western society, give most attention to. How we think about what has happened, how it affects how we think about ourselves and the world. The body piece, which is my favorite thing to talk about, but often left out of the conversation and the healing experiences. This is about how lived experiences show up in the body physically, physiologically, in our nervous systems, and also in our energy body, as you were mentioning. These are own experiences and those that come from previous lifetimes. The heart piece is about our relationship to ourselves and others, and themes of mistrust, betrayal often show up in that space. And I think one of the places where the rupture is huge, right? This is a interpersonal trauma, something that happens between humans. And so how can you trust after that? And then lastly, spirit is about our relationship to a higher self, our God or gods, our intuition, and our ancestors, or maybe even our sense of purpose. So in Body Rites, I offer 4 medicine journeys that help us along each of those spaces. The first journey is about embodiment, coming back home, calling ourselves back home slowly and surely, understanding what the book is about. The second journey is an abbreviated version of my 10-week workshop series, Healing on the Mat, and it brings in embodiment shapes, practices, trauma-informed yoga as a way to start to inhabit the body a little bit more. The third journey is about allowing plant medicine and natural resources to support the healing journey, and it explores the impact of trauma on the chakras that I mentioned earlier. And lastly, maybe my favorite journey is exploring intergenerational trauma, healing, and ancestral reverence as a healing support space.
Wow. 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 What you just shared that's in this book, I mean, it's just so much. I know I know we got it out like in a couple minutes, but it's deep. It's so much and so many facets to the healing journey. What I think is so important for people and what they're hearing right now is just especially the permission that it's not one thing. And if you haven't, quote unquote, fixed this or healed this at the first attempt or the first few or in the one style of approaching it, there are so many options to find new ways to be with this, to heal yourself, to find things that are more supportive. When someone is embarking on a journey like this, and especially when they find your book, how do they go about kind of settling into the work that's at hand? Because that piece about, I think for so many, and especially when you look at an abuse like this, when you're dealing with a sexual trauma, that it's so deeply connected to your ability to be creative, to your ability to be yourself, to birth anything into the world with any sense of courage or boldness or authenticity. And it feels like when things are that big, you know, something I encounter a lot as a teacher is, yeah, but they're having that little bit of breath work. Like, you don't know what I've been through. That's not going to work. That's not enough. The mountain seems so big for some of these painful experiences. When someone is ready to heal and they pick up your book, how do they go about it? How should they approach it? How should they settle in to beginning this process?
Yeah, I love thinking about my book finding its way to survivors. I say, when it reaches you, it's going to love you, and it'll know how to love you. And I think just making the commitment and the acknowledgement that something happened is a lot in and of itself. So many people, practice. The body is fascinating and magical and powerful in the ways that it tries to protect us, right? And so many folks have been avoiding, in denial, right? And they hear something, they may be listening to us have this conversation and remembering for the first time that something happened when they were a young person. And so I just want to say, I believe you. Even if it feels hard to remember all the details, I still believe you. And that's the first step, is being honest with yourself about what happened, and then starting anywhere, right? Starting anywhere. This healing journey can be so deeply alienating and isolating. And so if it feels right to reach out for support, I think that's a beautiful second step as well. That might be a therapist, it might be a friend, someone that you trust, someone that will take the journey with you. But yeah, just that first acknowledgement to yourself and the commitment. I want to heal. I want to heal from this. I no longer want this to dictate how I live, how I breathe, how I be in relationships, how I love myself.
Ooh. There was something I saw on your Instagram page, one of the posts that you put up. I really loved this. It said, "Where does your body archive your life stories? Shame is not the life companion you deserve." Wow. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So I believe that life manifests in the body. The good things, the hard things, the bad things, the joyful things, the sweet things, especially the traumatic things. And so I like to invite people as a practice of embodiment. This word that's trending and buzzing, everyone's kind of throwing it around, but not necessarily we don't understand maybe naturally what that might mean. And so I like to invite people to consider, where does that thing that happened when you were a child or in college, where does that live in your body? And most of the time, when people take a moment, they might say, oh, I feel it in my belly or in my back. Right. So I do this 2-part meditation sometimes where I'll invite folks to take a moment to remember the last time that they experienced something mildly agitating. Right. So most people think about when someone cut them off in traffic. Right. And as they're in this meditation, I'm inviting them to notice what their body sensations are. Right. They'll say, oh, my neck is tense, my shoulders are tense, my heart rate is increasing, I'm seeing them frown, right? So the body's tensing up. That's a perfect example of how something that happened a week ago, 2 weeks ago is still present, right? And then I'll ask them to consider the last time they experienced pleasure or joy. And it happens every time. Their shoulders will soften. You'll see they're smiling. And I'm like, I'm not going to ask you what you're remembering, but notice those sensations. So in that same way, something mundane like that can show up. We see our lived experiences living in our bodies. Right. This can also show up physically in physical health issues. I was just speaking with someone recently about a battle they're having with diabetes. And I talk about the intergenerational components of that, the survival skill of having to be sweet in order to survive, that descendants of enslaved ancestors practiced, right? And so how that manifests in the body. The experience of fibroids or reproductive issues passed down the maternal line, right? Reflux, acid reflux as a manifestation of anxiety. So I can talk on and on about this, but those are just a few examples. And I think when we can get connected to our body and search ourselves for where those live, we can heal them and make space for our birthrights, joy, peace, love, sweetness.
Wow. To speak to the intergenerational trauma piece of it, I'm so curious in what you've observed in your work in terms of, I found that if someone in this lifetime, if one of the challenges that they face is that they had an experience of sexual trauma, very often you see it throughout the family line. And it's something that has occurred with your mother, your grandmother, your aunts. And it seems to be this kind of theme. It's a little more rare for someone to be like the first person in the family that this has happened to.
Right.
And so I'm just curious what you see, especially from as a psychologist, but also from a spiritual lens of what is that kind of lineage trauma? What is that story being told? And how do you work with that energy if it has been present in multiple generations?
Yes. Yeah, I love this question so much because I was speaking about how alienating sexual trauma can be. And in this conversation, I also name incest, right? That not only is it happening for women identifying folks in the same bloodline, but it might be happening within the family entirely, right? And I find it quite profoundly saddening that multiple women in the family can have experienced sexual trauma, but none of them know about the other person's experience, right? There's this culture of secrecy that we have, especially in communities of color, that presents an obstacle, right, to healing. So culture of secrecy. and just the conversation of sexual trauma being taboo. I also see that when folks do come forward, sometimes family members don't believe them, or for whatever reason. I think often coming from a place of trauma and their own woundedness, they misplace their loyalty to someone, something, reputation, right? Or it can just be really hard to look at. And so this goes way, way back. I talk a lot about in the book the influence of colonization and enslavement on the sexual objectification of Black women and Black bodies in particular in our modern world. There's a direct connection there. And so many of us have internalized that oppression, that our bodies are not ours, that they don't belong to us. And so, those themes continue to stay ever present and are really important for us to be exploring in our healing as family members, as kindred chosen family. I think that, in my specific spiritual tradition, Ifa, Isheshe tradition, the belief is that you come back when you transition and you become an ancestor, that you come back into that same bloodline. And so as I was thinking about our time today, I had a shower thought that made me quite emotional. That if with that, belief system in my tradition, I could potentially give birth to my grandmother. Right? And maybe, I don't know, maybe my grandmother has experienced sexual trauma. Maybe she hasn't. But this idea that through epigenetics, in the way that I am committed to my healing, she could have a different experience. It's just wild to me.
Yeah, it's so profound. And it's so special. And it's like, God, it's just... And bear with me, everyone listening, because I hope this is tracking. But, I think for those of us that do really believe and work with lineage healing in our own lives, there is this understanding that you're healing 7 generations back, 7 generations forward. And even hearing you share that, I feel just like a little tender right now, because when I think of some of the things that I've kind of been chewing on my whole life and working through for myself, there is such a pride to this idea. Like sometimes I feel like I can feel it in real time when I come into a new awareness, or I feel a blockage or a pain like physically leave my body and my energy field. It's like there is this felt experience sometimes of it like shifting timelines backward and forward.
Yes.
And you're just like, something has changed for someone in my ancestry. Something has changed for the child that hasn't yet been thought of on earth that will be here. And it's just, my God, it's just the most special thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So sacred. And yeah, I'm feeling the tenderness too. I'm feeling you. And I just want to say, sometimes for your listeners, I know you have amazing, an amazing fan base. But sometimes when we are listening to things like this, we might be like, oh my gosh, what is this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I like to invite folks that are noticing signs of resistance in their body to see if they can replace that with curiosity. Because I believe at the same time that there is resistance, that means that there's space for a shift, that discomfort that you feel is an opportunity. Right? Those moments where you're researching, you're finding yourself researching lineage, traditions, you put your keys in a certain place and now you go back to look for them and they're not there. These sensations that, you might be feeling in your body of tingling on your back, right? Or ringing in your ears. These moments of inconsolable emotion. right? Those are opportunities, openings, portals for what I think you and I are both talking about, that we know intimately, the dreams that you're having. Just inviting listeners to, see that as a place of curiosity and potentially a portal for their own healing.
Yeah. When a certain, I think, element of surrender happens in your life and acceptance that it is, whatever it is present, and it must be looked at. I feel like there are just these openings that appear all over, these portals that appear all over that can give you, what a friend many years ago in a course I was studying said to me was, it can happen in the twinkle of an eye. And I know that to be so deeply true now. It's like, if there is something that is in your awareness, keep following it and keep noticing where it shows up. And, to what you shared so beautifully, it's like, if there is a dream that is lingering, something that is resonant or something that came up, sit in it, let yourself be with it, bring it up for review, because so often we can heal things in ways that we never really imagined by just noticing the openings every time they're there, the portals every time, and walking through.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I center the experience of BIPOC in my work, folks of the global majority, but I think this work is for everyone. You mentioned intuition earlier, and that's one of the pillars of the work. And also, I believe living in bodies that the world insists on seeing as broken, instead of honoring and respecting and beginning from a place of wholeness, is hard. So I find it completely rational to want to leave the body and live outside of ourselves, and maybe safer that way. But I talk about one of the biggest ruptures to trauma in general, no matter who you are, your identities. It could be this rupture to intuition, which is our place of knowing. I believe our connection to all that is greater than us. Again, that might be God, Creator, Orisha, intuition, sense of purpose, ancestors. And when we live in our bodies, we're able to recognize those sensations that you and I are talking about. It's hard to recognize those, to acknowledge them when we're not in our bodies. And so I say to folks, prepare your intuition like your life depends on it, because it does. It does. And from that place, we can start to heal ourselves from an inner knowing versus externalizing our trust and waiting for someone else to tell us how to heal. Right? So earlier you used the word expert. And I personally don't. I'm an expert of my experience. But I help folks remember how to trust themselves and their own intuition. I think that's the goal. And folks that are in touch with their intuition in their bodies are forces of nature.
So beautifully said. Something I'd like to ask is there anything different about the masculine journey to healing from sexual trauma? And any advice, any shares that you have for our male listeners who might be embarking on this journey?
Yeah. At every intersection of identity, specifically for marginalized folks, my book is actually written for the full gender continuum, non-binary folks as well. But with male and man identifying folks, I think that the shame can be even more, right? It's not about trauma Olympics, but in the culture of secrecy, for a man to out himself as a survivor of sexual trauma comes with some things that are similar, but also some things that are unique to that experience. And so I want to say I believe you too. And it doesn't make you less of a man to have been violated. It wasn't your fault. I also talk about that the intersection of being transgender, right? The prevalence of sexual trauma goes up with every marginalized identity. And I do feel sad often that men and male bodied folks are left out of the conversation. There are fewer resources available as well. And everything that I've mentioned today also is true for those experiences. They touch on the male experience as well, the mind, body, heart, and spirit piece as well. Yeah, so one of the things that if there was one thing that, one piece of medicine, it would be to find community, find a safe space in the alienation.
Yeah, finding community. I think especially I think about men often in this predicament because as you've called out, there are less resources. There does seem to be different layers of stigma associated with it. And very often in our mainstream culture, as I've seen it, it's played out in two really specific ways where if you're a male and you were abused by a woman, it's just kind of like, oh, well, you got some. It's kind of this thing where I've seen even the reaction in the victim is to laugh it off or to turn it into just something about conquest or something about, just like male vitality.
Right.
And if it's a scenario where you're a male and you were violated by another male, then it brings a different kind of layer of shame and shadow to it and questioning or projections about how you identify sexually or what that means about quote unquote like your ability to be with a woman or hold it down. Your manhood. Yeah. And it's just for so many men especially, just culturally, societally, historically, men are allowed to feel so much less than women in our society, and it's expected that they really don't feel anything. And so when I think about all those layers on what an experience must be like for a male identified survivor, it is such a mountain, and it changes everything. It changes how you know yourself. Men are trained more so than women to really see themselves through one kind of view, which is powerful or provider or protector or, but something that doesn't require an emotional life. And to unearth that, it takes tremendous courage and tremendous patience and tremendous presence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I want to invite anyone that's tuning in, because I want to share something, but it might be a little bit graphic. So just take care of yourself as you're listening. As you were sharing, I was thinking about how often in the same conversation around, oh, men can't be sexually assaulted, men can't be raped, right? Especially by women. Sometimes people get it twisted around the body's physiological and natural response. And so if a male-bodied person's body performs in a way that presents an erection, it's like, oh, you wanted that. Right. And same with female bodied folks, that if there is physical arousal during a sexual assault, that it meant that you wanted it. And I want to address that, straightforward. That is not the case. The body responds involuntarily without your participation sometimes. And so the other piece that you named around, what do you remember the second point that you made? Sorry.
If you are a victim at the hands of another man.
Yes. And living in a homophobic society,
yes.
Right? That then there is insult to your manhood and even your character, right? Which can present further alienation and isolation. So thank you so much for bringing that to the table for conversation. Yeah. In my practice, I find that male-bodied folks will mention it in the first couple of appointments, and then it'll be a long time before they mention it again, or they'll say, that thing that I told you right? They'll just kind of talk around it. And, you know, these are folks that I've been working with for years that are still having a hard time even broaching the topic, right? And also often experience frustration in their own understanding of their sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah. For anyone listening right now that may not be a survivor of sexual abuse, but has a partner or someone in their life that they care for and they want to be more supportive for something they don't have firsthand experience in, what are some ways that we can support people we love that are on this journey?
Yeah, to absolutely believe them, right? To not ask them to tell you the story from beginning to end to make it real, right? Because that can be re-traumatizing for the person that experienced it and maybe potentially for you, you know, listening and holding the story. I invite folks to ask survivors of sexual trauma what they need in support, to let them name it, right? How can I support you? What do you need? Have you thought about this or have you thought about that? Because experiencing sexual trauma means that power, agency, and choice were stolen and stripped away, I like to invite community to support nurturing, cultivating, nourishing, restoring those three things: power, choice, and agency. So the more you can say, what do you need? How can I support you? And they have a moment to decide, oh, you know, I just want you to be here next to me. Can I have a hug? Can you help me find a therapist that specializes in work with sexual trauma? Do you know of any books? Right? The more we can do that, the more we're supporting that relationship with intuition.
Beautiful. Thank you. Some of the other work that you do that I would love to really explore from the lens of a psychologist, from the lens of a trauma-informed therapist. You also work with the world of psychedelics and medicines as part of the journey. I've shared on this show to some extent that a part of my healing journey was really kind of radically accelerated and deepened through my own exploration with different medicines over the years. And I mean, I can say this like so honestly, like my whole life, I was definitely a square, like complete square. Like watching commercials as a kid, like the Dare commercials, they worked on me. I was like, not my brain. I don't want to be that egg. Like, so I was very, very, very hyper vigilant in a lot of ways. Even as I was on my healing journey, it's like, okay, I can heal with that, not that, you know? And there were so many judgments present for me and so many fears present of the unknown, of how you'll react to things, of what you'll come to know. And then when I settled into my own experiences and I began exploring, I realized for me how deeply I needed to be disarmed in that way in order to get to the depth of healing I needed in my journey. And I will say that, especially working with certain medicines, the access it gave me to my body, the awareness it gave me to having this experience of being the soul in the body, the spirit in the human experience, it just profoundly changed me. So I would love to hear about your work in that space, and for anyone that is considering it, who you think would be potentially a good candidate for that exploration.
I love that you shared your experience. I love that you used the word disarmed, and then talked about how it made you, the medicine supported you to be so present in your body. And those may sound like a contradiction, but if you know, you know, kind of experience. So yeah, I am really excited about what we're seeing happening with these sacred medicines, and their, reemergence in the world in a way that is cloaked in liberation, right? So the reasons that we have collectively these fears around the medications is, again, white supremacy culture, global colonization, um, created a sense of fear around these sacred plant medicines that are ancient in their wisdoms and our community to indigenous tradition. And so, again, where so many of us are unlearning the internalized oppression and fear that we've taken in as a means of survival. And at present, there are some sacred plant medicines that you can use freely, right? And there are others that we're working on being decriminalized. And so I look forward to that moment. I can speak to some of my personal journeys with psilocybin. Sometimes are referenced as magic mushrooms, right? And I love them so much. They're so wise. They're a heart medicine, and in my experience, similar to yours, there is this profound experience of my soul and my spirit, and that I'm having a human experience. And I feel when I'm in community with this medicine that I am receiving the best hug, this long hug. And also, I'm looking at things that are hard, right? So, the first time I had a sit, I was in Mexico with a teacher that I love and respect, an elder. And in the first part of my journey, I wept. I wept. I had experienced so much loss. I've experienced a number of traumas throughout my life. And I was just sitting there and I was rocking and I was swaying and I just wept. Without my participation, these tears were falling out of my eyes. And I would say, oh, this is recent. This is recent grief. Oh, this is old. It's like I was narrating my experience. And then the second part of my journey was a kiki with my ancestors. And it changed my life. It changed my life as someone who sometimes feels really alone in the world. The first voice I heard was an auntie of mine who I lost in 2018. I grew up living next door to her. And every time I walked in her house, she would say, "Hey, my baby." And that's how she greeted me in my first medicine journey. And they left me with the message of, we are always this close. And since then, the sensations of them are so palpable. I can hear their voices in a way that I wasn't before. So I get really excited, as you can imagine, given all the things we've talked about today, holding space for folks to have that experience in their bodies and in ways that opens conversation for the intergenerational healing that reaches backwards, and in ways that literally changes the physiology of the body, that changes us at a cellular level so that we aren't carrying these wounds and these traumas and the pains forward.
Can you talk about some of that last piece that you were saying of like the rewiring, some of the experiences or the ways that you relate to some of the traumas, how that can shift and change through a psychedelic or medicine experience?
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things we see that happens with complex trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression, is that it touches the nervous system, right? And instead of, ideally, we experience something that's difficult, our nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system activates. We might find ourselves in the reaction of fight, flight, freeze, submit, or tend and befriend as a result of that perception of threat, whatever that moment is. Ideally, we would come back down after that moment has passed and we're now safe, come back to a baseline where our nervous systems are cool, calm, and chill, ideally. But we don't live in an ideal world, as I often say, especially at those intersections of marginalized identities and within our context. And so what can happen is we get stuck, we get stalled out in those activated spaces: fight, flight, freeze, submit, tend, and befriend, which means that we might experience hypervigilance, we might experience anxiety. Sometimes you know that when you're breathing in your chest space versus in your belly space. Right? We have all experienced anxiety, right? The other piece is that we can find ourselves in the opposite, sort of under aroused zone where we're depressed, we're numb, we have difficulty concentrating or being motivated to show up for life. And so these medicines help to reset the nervous system, reset the brain. For example, ketamine there's been a lot of research that is showing a connection between with its touch and healing around racialized trauma. So it's like, I heard it once described as though you turn a computer monitor off and then let it come back on, right? Turn it back on. So it's a rewiring of the brain. Whereas other medicines like MDMA or psilocybin with their entheogens, they work with more from a heart space, and they make the sensations of trauma and PTSD, for example, they make them more tolerable in the moment so that you can process traumatic content without being triggered the way you would without the medicine. And so that's the like the key, the magic wand. And I say magic, it isn't magic, right? It is ancient medicine, but it can feel magical.
It can feel magical. I'm going to add this then just for a little bit of fun, but also for insight. For those that have been following the Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef, which first off, King Kendrick, all day, all day, all day. One of the things that Kendrick said in his songs is that he recommended that Drake should do ayahuasca. So I would love to hear from you about the ayahuasca journey and how that may be best used.
Yes. What a fun question. Yeah, I posted recently on my Instagram this meme that says, I might not be your cup of tea. And actually, I'm not likely a tea. I'm ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is the mother, the great mother of these sacred plant medicines, and so special, so special. Many folks you might talk to that have sat with Mother Aya may talk about how it's like, it's the real deal, right? How it can feel really intense, how it's the most loving drag. So for Kendrick,
it's a long journey.
A long journey and the most loving drag, right? Those are the words that always come to mind. God. It is the reed of all reeds and the rebirth of all rebirths. And we know that in order to experience rebirth, we have to die, right? And so Mother Aya, Mama Aya holds us in that sacred moment of letting things go, letting things die, so that we can be transformed. And so, for Kendrick to suggest that to Drake, I support it. I support it.
I support it. I think it could really elevate the song making.
Right.
New content other than using women.
That's right. That is right. To sit with a great mother.
See, even more like brilliance from Kendrick. Like just when you think you've seen, you've gotten to the paradox, the other end of something he said, there is more.
There is more.
Oh my God, that was something else. I will be discussing that on a solo episode soon.
Yes, I feel like there's often this conversation about Kendrick that his music we don't hear in the clubs. It's not a dance vibe, they're not necessarily catchy, but that he takes us to depths and places that sometimes we're afraid to go to. And so I think his music is a portal if we allow it to be. And in the same ways that we might be avoiding looking at hard things, we might not be feeling Kendrick's music for some of those same reasons. Right. Truly. But listen to it. Go back and listen after this episode and see what you hear that maybe you didn't before.
He makes medicine music. Mm-hmm. Yeah. K-Dot is a healer, always been a healer. And even, I've been talking about this at length in so many group chats, but, he makes music for thinkers. He makes music for healers. He makes music for feelers, for people that have had complex lived experiences, for those that don't want to skate on the surface. Mm-hmm. And there is a time and a place for every kind of music. And obviously Drake is immensely talented. We cannot in any way take that away from him. Incredible songwriter, delivery, all of it. And to me, makes very harmful music that keeps people stuck in place, and keeps us existing and skating on that surface level of experiencing life. Mm-hmm. And when you're ready to go deeper,
right,
there's more.
Yeah, music can certainly be medicine. And I like to talk about sometimes and think about in my own experiences what makes a shaman. Right? They often say that what makes a shaman is a near-death experience, and the wisdom that someone can pull from that becomes a way that they're able to guide and connect. And so I like to think about that too in the context of this conversation. Right? When you're humble enough to learn from your near-death experiences, right? The micro ones and the macro ones. What you create changes. How you create changes.
Let it change you. Let it change you. As we get ready to close out this episode, I would like to ask you, Dr. Shena, we offer a little bit of soul work at the end of every episode. So as everyone has listened to this episode, and until we meet again next week, if you have any soul work that could help integrate what was just heard and a new way to maybe experience or explore it over the course of this next week, I would love for you to share.
Yeah, thank you so much for that invitation. I'd love to take us through a very short meditation, if that's okay with you.
Please.
Okay. So as you're watching, I invite you to choose a comfortable seated shape. You might feel your feet making contact with the earth or the floor if that feels accessible. Allowing the hands to fall gently to rest on the lap, or maybe placing one hand over the heart, one over the belly, both over the belly, your choice. And feeling the support underneath the feet, the sensation of being held up. And then allowing the head, the crown of the head, to reach toward the sky, toward all the possibilities. Inviting a moment to breathe, to connect with the breath. And then allowing the eyes to make a choice as well. Closing, softly gazing down, or remaining open. And when it feels right, beloveds, I invite you to search your body, search the place where your intuition lives. Where in your body does your intuition live? And if it feels right, I invite you to place your hands there, or simply bring your inner awareness to that space, taking a moment to notice, to cherish the connection, to breathe into it, to express gratitude for it. For 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Gently guiding yourself back to the present, remembering that you can come back to this place, and I hope you will as much as you need. Blinking the eyes open if they're closed, allowing the eyes to float up to the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you. Your book, Body Rites, is available now. And how can everyone connect with you and your work further?
Yes, please stay close. You can connect with me via my website, www.embodiedtruthhealing. I am on Instagram under the same handle at Embodied Truth Healing, and on TikTok at Shena.means.opens the way.
So beautiful. Dr. Shena Young, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Honored to have you here, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week. Namaste.
Namaste.